Good morning. I recently visited Yemen, and in Yemen I met a young woman called Amina. She was in her early 20s. She looked a lot older than those of you in the audience. She felt the cares of the world. She was the sole carer for her two younger siblings. She worked when she could in her neighbours' farms, fields, in their houses, but she had no reliable source of income. She often didn't know where the next meal was coming from, and she often went to bed hungry. She and her siblings are not alone. Tonight, about 800 million people will go to bed hungry. Let's just bring that alive. Can I ask the people in the front 2 rows there just to stand up? If this was the world, those people in front of you would be going to bed hungry tonight. If they were as close to us as they are, we would struggle with that. We will struggle with that sense of shared humanity. But equally, tonight, 8 people will sleep rather better. Let me ask the people here in the 2nd row and 3rd row and 4th row to stand up. Now, people here doesn't mean women. If the women would sit down. We have roughly 8 people standing up there now. Those 8 people, those 8 men, have the same wealth, not just as the people in this room, or in Manchester, or even in the United Kingdom. Those men have the same wealth as half the world's population. Now, when you have inequality like that, what kind of planet are we creating? What kind of economy are we running? Now, some people would say organizations like Oxfam shouldn't worry about those 8. We should worry about the poor. We should recognize that those 8 and millions like them actually are generating wealth. And that wealth has played an amazing part in taking people across the world out of poverty. Now let's celebrate that. In the last 30 years, the world has taken more people out of extreme poverty than in the previous known history. And that's not just about money. It's about children going to school. It's about people getting immunization. It's about families living longer. The world is a better place for most people. But it is leaving behind a population roughly the size of Europe. 800 million people living in extreme poverty. And we need to look at why that is and what we can do to catch up. Because, of course, those 8 people are often very generous. They are creating wealth, and many of them as individuals are philanthropic. But that doesn't feel enough. Instinctively, it feels there's something wrong there. It's not only us who feels that. In one of his final speeches, Barack Obama echoed Oxfam's research and said it's not possible to have a stable world in which 1% of the world's population have greater wealth than the other 99% combined. And it's not only President Obama. Academics from all sorts of different schools and disciplines have identified that in extremely unequal societies, they are more violent, they're more conflict prone, there is more civil unrest. People live shorter lives, they're less healthy, they're less happy, and they have less confidence in their future. So we need to build an economy that actually challenges that. And Oxfam got really interested in this, looking at the aftermath of the economic crash of 2008 and who was benefiting and who wasn't. And we found buried deep in a report, not by a radical campaigning agency, but by one of our most prestigious international banks, Credit Suisse, the statistic that 1% of wealth, 1%, was all that was owned by the bottom half of the world's population. We identified that 85 people had the same wealth as that 3.5 billion people. And over the last 4 or 5 years, albeit with methodological changes, that figure has moved from enough people to get into a double-decker bus to enough people to get into a golf buggy. 8 people now have the same wealth as half the world's population. Now, what's driving an economy that lets that happen? We think it's to do with our basic economic model. We think it's to do with that model based on rational economic man. Yes, man. That says everyone will act in their own best interest, and that those interests will come together and they'll shape economic prosperity. Well, there's 4 main flaws in that kind of thinking. The first is that those economic figures don't really describe human activity as we know it. While Adam Smith was writing The Wealth of Nations, who was cooking his lunch? It was probably his wife, Mrs. Smith, nicely cutting off the stalks of the broccoli just as he likes it. Who's measuring the care, the compassion, the love that affect what we all do every day? That means that care work is not paid, not valued in economic models, and when it is paid, it's paid at minimal levels. The second issue is that kind of classical economics ignores power. The power of wealth to influence, to advocate, to get access to governments, and in many cases to form those very governments. We shouldn't then be surprised when those governments right across the world act in the interests of the wealthy. The third is that that kind of classical economics ignores the finite boundaries of our planet. We can double our GNP if we cut down our forests, but what are we doing for our successive generations? And how are we measuring pollution and carbon and all those other things that affect our well-being? And finally, classical economics, looking at totals, growth, averages, ignores the poor. They don't have enough wealth to figure in those stats. And the 8 people and the 1% totally dwarf their contributions. So from that point of view, we need to look differently. We need to shape an approach to economics that says, how do we work from the bottom up? How do we shape an economy, not just that allows some of that wealth to trickle down to the poor, but exists to eradicate poverty and ensure that people can live with dignity? We need to do that by wrestling back the power over our own economy, of our own politics. It's been done before. It sounds hard, but it's been done over centuries since the Magna Carta, with ordinary people pulling back power from the divine right of kings. It's been done over the last century, albeit only partially, as women have pulled back power from men in the public space and said, we want to share that. We want the jobs. We want the pay. We want the representation. A journey still in progress. And it's been done in recent decades, where lesbian and gay people have wrestled back the right, the apparent right, to enjoy family life, relationships, love, marriage in public from the straight population. We need to do that with economics, and we need to do it quickly. We have 800 million people living in extreme poverty, and many, many more just above that threshold. So what do we need to do it? Let's be clear, this isn't just a set of policy prescriptions. It's the way we disrupt our economy. It's the way we think about economics. We need to look at the way we trade across the world, because everything we buy or sell is linked to other parts of the world. We need to look at the way migration works for poorer people. We need to look at tax, nationally and internationally. It's the biggest businesses and the richest people, not just the 8. This isn't about the 8. It's about a wider approach to economics. About the way tax is paid. Why is it that the richest can move their money around? So either it's not seen or tax is paid at the lowest possible level. Why is it that Warren Buffett, one of the richest men in the world, asked, is it really right that I seem to pay tax at a lower rate than my secretary? We then need to look at spending that tax on public services, because it's those public services that make all the difference to people living in poverty. education, health, basic infrastructure. We need to look at the way we pay a living wage right across the world. It really hurts to be part of an economy where the people who are producing the basic goods and services that we consume every day get and expect to get, and we all live with the fact that they get a lower wage than they need to survive. And this has to be supplemented by extra work, by benefits, or in the case of people like Amina, by going hungry. Those are the sorts of things we've got to work on and look at differently. We also need to look at the way we embrace our planet, and we factor in those issues of where is our power coming from? How is it affecting future generations? The way we embrace technology. At its best, it's life transforming for all of us. At its worst, it's taking jobs away from poor people. And it was Bill Gates, one of the richest men in the world, who actually said, shouldn't we be considering a tax on robots in the workplace? Not because they're wrong, but because who is going to be paying the taxes that actually contribute to running those basic services that make a difference for the whole population? We need to look at our corporate models. We need successful business to drive the economy. We need jobs, we need investment, and for that we need to take risks, and people need to make a profit. That has been a central part of the economic progress and the well-being that has increased in recent generations. But do we really need a model where only shareholders and owners capture such a high proportion of the benefits? Can't we look at different economic models, and can't we promote those models where the community in which those businesses exist, the employees, the customers, share in its welfare, its profits, and its contribution much more fully? There's many different ways, there's many different policies we could pick up and we could address. If we look at them through the perspective of what's their impact on women and what's their impact on men, we will get a very different lens on the development we need to promote. You would all have different views about what the right policies might be. What's absolutely clear is we can't do nothing. Economic growth is slowing across the world, and even at its best will leave many of those 800 million out of it altogether. We need a rising tide that will lift all boats, not just the super yachts sailing away, the sailing boats following behind them more slowly, and some of the rafts and canoes of the poorest getting flooded as the waters come in. So we need to look at how we consume. Who do we buy from? Do we take note in this international trade of the ethics of the very companies we're working with? Do we talk to our politicians about the issues that we care about? They get overwhelmed with lobbying on some issues, but they're not hearing much about those fundamental issues of an economy, a human economy, that benefits poor people. Indeed, which of those politicians locally and nationally are we voting for when the time comes? But most of all, we need to look at our own behavior. It's our own values. It's the way we live our daily life, the way we bring up and relate to our family, our friends, our work, our lives, that will make a change to whether we can build a human economy. That would not be an economy for the 1%. It would not be an economy even for the 99%. It would be an economy for the 100%, a human economy. Thank you.